bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Cuthervance, also known as Ricky Varanus, and today we have Google whistleblower Zach Vorhies. He's also been on Sam Tripoli's show, the Tinfoil Hat Podcast. So if you enjoyed this conversation, go back and check out Sam Tripoli's archives. It was a great interview he did there. And I'll keep this intro short. We did talk about AI, current events, science, conspiracies, so many interesting topics. So hopefully you enjoy this. But I know I've been putting out a lot of episodes, so I don't want you guys to get sick of my voice. So I'll keep this intro short. If you want to support the show, in the show description, you can find links to our Patreon page. Even if it's just $1, it's truly, truly appreciated. If everybody donated $1 who downloads or listens to this podcast, I could do this full time. So that kind of puts in perspective that even just $1 doesn't seem like a lot, but it goes a long way if everybody pitched in. Also, share the show. If you can't financially support the show, it's completely understandable. Obviously, the future is super uncertain right now. So text it to a friend. If there's any conversation, this one or some other one that you think is important or somebody might find interesting, share it, because all of this stuff is being suppressed. I'm constantly having more and more issues with articles I'm sharing being flagged, having third-party fact checkers saying that it's not factual or whatnot. So the sharing, reviewing, all that stuff goes a long way. People who have reviewed and given me positive reviews, I really, really appreciate it. Everybody else who and not many who've given me any negative reviews, I appreciate you still taking the time to write stuff. I know I'm not perfect. I know I have flaws. Hopefully you find much more things you love about the show than things you dislike about the show. And I think for the most part that seems to be true, because I get way more positive feedback than I get negative feedback. And the positive feedback is always a motivation to continue doing this. I'm happy that I can kind of give people the same things that podcasts have gave me, and that's different perspectives, thought-provoking conversations, and sometimes just a way to pass the time and make the time go by. So hopefully I'm helping you guys with that too. So I'm also on Instagram, RV Theory 6, Twitter, RV Theory 6. Our YouTube channel is also RV Theory 6. You can search Ripple Effect Podcast. You'll find the YouTube channel. You'll also find the Facebook page for the Ripple Effect Podcast. I also have a personal Facebook page. If you want to throw me a friend request, just let me know that you're not a robot. Send me a little message. Just let me know, and I'll be more than happy to connect. And I've connected with a lot of fans, which is awesome. So I think that's it. Support the show, share the show, tweet the show, review the show, all that type of stuff. It all helps. And let's keep spreading these conversations. And I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Yeah, I guess I just had this dream of working in the game industry and making video games, because I liked playing video games as a kid. And so I went to the University of Oregon, got 3 degrees in the sciences, actually 1 degree in 3 majors. So that being computer science, psychology, and mathematics. And so I used that to get into the game industry, and then I kept on, and then I went from there to going to Google, and then once at Google, I was like, oh, this is the place I need to be, and it was really good. They treated me really well. Google's got a reputation for being a company that's great for to its employees, and I can verify that as 100% true. Google just treated me so well, and I really liked the mission statement at the time, which was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible, and then also, to don't be evil. And I was like, this is exactly what the world needs, is a company with this sort of progressive attitude. And then in 2016, the party ended because someone that they didn't like got elected to the presidency of the United States.
So you were working there, and so what were some of the changes you were noticing after Trump got elected?
Yeah, so Trump got elected, and immediately the company as a whole was very, 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 very unhappy. And I could tell how that it wasn't just people that were unhappy, like the peons like myself, but it was the executive crew that was very unhappy. And I found out about this when they did a TGIF, which happens weekly, and they kind of had like a Trump edition. And in this meeting, they were very unhappy with the state of the election. Sergey Brin, who helped found the company, said that he was personally offended at the election of Donald Trump. And the CFO was kind of in tears, recounting how the night unfolded and how she was having a conversation with a Googler in New York. And he's like, I think we're going to lose this. And she's like, yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to lose this election. And I'm like, what do you mean we are going to lose this election? Like, this is the election, not of Google, but of the American people. And so the thing that kind of really alarmed me about this was something that the CEO said at this TGIF, which was when asked, what are some of the successful things that Google had done? And he mentioned that one of the successful things was that Google was able to censor a lot of the fake news. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, we're censoring fake news? When did we start doing that? And so this led me down a rabbit hole of finding out what Google thought was fake news, and then discovering a large censorship regime, in fact, I'll even call it massive, entitled Machine Learning Fairness.
So what is that?
So machine learning fairness is the type of AI. And if you think of AI as like a circle, and there's like AIs that can play chess, and certain AIs that can find cat faces in photographs. Well, a subsection of that AI would be machine learning. And the way that it works is that it creates a neural network, which is a graph of nodes that connect to each other through kind of like brain neurons. They fire together. And what they do is, they're able to classify things, but they're highly specialized. And so the way that you specialize one of these neural networks is you take it, you create basically a pile of data that has labels on it. So for example, let's use a concrete example here. You've got, let's say, 10,000 articles, and you get like a bunch of people to go through and classify all of the articles as either fake news or real news. And then you feed it to this machine learning algorithm, and what it will do is it'll start to come up with its own set of hypotheses that will determine whether something is fake or not. And so you train it with this data, and then it generates the pattern recognition AI, and you can feed it new data, and it will use the patterns from the previous 1,000 samples that you gave it to come to a probabilistic score that it assigns to the new data to say, this is fake news and this is not fake news. Now I say 1,000, but really these things take a lot of data, like, big data enabled AI. And so, we're talking maybe like 10,000 to a million, classified pieces of data in order for these AI systems to really get good at classification. And so now that you've got this baked in classification algorithm, then you just, you apply that to, news articles. And then you're like, oh, well, this new news article that comes out is fake or it's not fake. And, and they have a degree of accuracy. And the bigger the data, the more accurate they are. And so that's machine learning in a nutshell. What Google did is that they created, basically social justice machine learning. And that's what they referred to as machine learning fairness. Because if they called it machine learning discrimination, that wouldn't fly. But this fluffy word like fairness, well, if you're against fairness, then you're kind of a bad person, right? So this is sort of as soon as I saw that term, machine learning fairness, I went, aha, I bet it means the exact opposite. I bet it's justifying unfairness in the system. And that's actually what I found, is that this was justifying discrimination because, they wanted to create sort of this, I'm going to use the term equity, where everyone's equal in all respects. And what was really startling was the design documents surrounding this project, in which, there was a question that was asked, which was, could objective reality be unfair? And the answer was yes. And the example that Google used was, suppose someone is doing an image search for CEO. Now, if the results that are returned feature mostly men, and even if that's representative of objective reality, this can still be considered algorithmically unfair and justify product intervention. And so I'm sitting here reading this like late at night going, what the, this is absolutely, Marxism digitized and placed into an algorithm that, they're going to now, that's not that they were, that they were rolling this thing out to not only Google search, but to, YouTube video search and news search and, I would guess eventually, the scientific paper scholar.google.com. And, not only was it aimed at this, but it was also a monitoring system. And so there was this, a 24-hour response system. I think it's called Purple Rain. People can go to my website and check out the leaks in their entirety and determine if I'm right on this. But I think the project is called Project Purple Rain, and what it does is it looks at the tweets and other social media sites and tries to figure out what's trending, right? So they used a couple of examples for trending items. One of them was an earthquake. Like, let's say that there's an earthquake and everyone starts tweeting about earthquake. Well, now they can know that there's an earthquake happened. But then also they used the sort of idea of like Trump had this like thing with Comey before he fired him. And so Comey was in the news a bunch of times. They actually took the stories that were being formed by Comey and his battle with Trump and used this in a series of design documents on how to better manage their 24-hour response algorithm to figure out what was trending and what was not. And once they could figure out what was trending, then a series of staff would apply metrics to figure out what they wanted to suppress and what they wanted to boost. And the system that was used for boosting and suppressing was called BitTwiddler. I don't know why they called it that, but this twiddler would re-rank results based on, what sort of management's whims were and what they thought was fair and what they thought was prejudicial. And, they could just sort of like dial all these knobs as any way that they would see fit. And so I saw this whole system and all their design docs. And I thought to myself, no one's going to believe that Google's going to do this because, the media spent all this time like telling us how great Google is and how and how the search results are organic. Like they kept on using this thing like organic. And it's really beaten into us, at the time that Google was this really fair company. So, here with all these design documents, I realized that they're planning on locking down the whole goddamn internet and no one's going to believe me. So I better download all these documents. Now, people may ask, well, was Zach like on the Google search team? Like, how did he have access to all of these documents within the company? And I want to put out there that I had no special access. I was just a regular full-time senior software engineer at Google working on the YouTube app. And as a full-time, software engineer, I just had regular access. And so these documents were up there for anyone to search for. If they wanted to find it, they could just find it. Any employee. And because I'm kind of a researcher and I like to go down rabbit holes, I was just someone who just found it and went, oh my God. So I downloaded all of this just for my own sanity and to prove that everything I was seeing was real, and remind myself, at a future date. And then I kind of kept up on that pattern of downloading more until I had this like cache of documents that were like 950 pages long. And so I've got these documents, and I'm trying to decide, like, because I'm watching everything happen, because 2017 was a really big turning point in American history. One day it'll be written down, all the things that have happened. But, Google's trying to lock down their data. The media's having this Russian collusion hoax, which no matter how much information surfaces, they won't address it. They keep on pushing it. And so sort of a breaking point came to me when Donald Trump came back from Saudi Arabia and he tweeted something, and then Google like deleted the word out of their Arabic translation dictionary. And this word was kafefe. And seeing Google delete kafefe out of their Arabic translation dictionary in order to score cheap points against the president, which was then used as justification to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove a sitting president for mental incapacity, in part because of the tweets that he was making that weren't making any sense because they were deleting the word out of the dictionary. I went, what the hell is going on? Are you kidding me? I'm working for a company that's deleting words out of their dictionary to hurt the president. So
just real quick. So no, I was gonna say, well, one, you can swear on the show, so I didn't know if maybe you did say what the heck, or what the hell, or maybe more realistically you said what the fuck. But basically they were deleting the word out of the Arabic dictionary for the translation purposes to give, I guess, people who were translating it a different interpretation of what he was saying.
Well, they removed it, right? So what happened was this. So Trump went to Saudi Arabia and came back on May 31st, 2017. And he tweeted something of the following, like, despite the negative constant press, kafefe. And on June 1st, the next day, the New York Times wrote this article saying that a bunch of people had found a translation of kafefe, but which meant we will stand up, but that they had consulted with some sort of Arabic expert that said that the word was nonsense. And so they said, everyone's wrong, this word is nonsense. And so a senior executive at Google used that New York Times piece as justification to create a design document to remove this word out of their dictionary.
So
And
prior to this tweet, it was in their dictionary. It was recognized as a word.
yep, and there's articles, timestamped that you can go back and see that they have screenshots of this. And so what was interesting was, the team responsible for removing this word out of the dictionary had a very interesting name. They called themselves the Derrida team. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with postmodernism, but there is a sort of one of the founding members of postmodernism, and his name was Jacques Derrida. And he stated something along the lines of that the way to bring down the West was through the destruction of its language, And you see this today, like, oh, it's not black, it's African American, and then they change it to something else, and they keep on changing words to things, and then the old term becomes racist or sexist or whatever ist you want to apply to it, and then you got to use this new term, and then the language keeps on evolving. Well, that's not just by accident. That's actually got deep philosophical roots, and so. On how to bring down society. And it comes from this guy, Jacques Derrida. And so, I find it interesting that the team responsible for censorship coincidentally had the same name as Jacques Derrida, who is advocating for the destruction of Western culture through the manipulation of language.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it tells me that these people might know exactly what they're doing.
Well, you're seeing it over and over again throughout the years. I mean, it's you would always hear these stories of your phone's listening to you. It's influencing what you're Googling. It's influencing. I mean, there's a video on online called "Free is a Lie," which is all he kind of breaks down. I forget what his name is like Alan. I forget what his. I'll look it up, but it's a great video. It's called "Free is a Lie," and it's about how. Google, they give you all these free things like this amazing Pixel phone and this amazing Google Maps and all that stuff. But it's not free because what you're doing is you're sacrificing all your personal information, any privacy, all that for these services. And, they talked about how they know when they've done so many studies with affecting your moods. They've done so many studies. I mean, Silicon Valley, big tech is hiring tons of psychologists and people who can understand the brain and what how to affect people's thinking and whatnot. They're turning into Edward Bernays. They're turning into the godfather of propaganda, the way he understood how to manipulate people's desires and how in many cases what's influencing your decision making or your perspective are things that you're not even aware of, and with the power that Google, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all these big companies have, I mean, they can easily do that. And they've done studies on knowing when you're going to break up with somebody or when you're going to get with somebody or all these things. They know all these personal pieces of information by looking at the algorithms prior to you even knowing and or before you even make it public, just by analyzing all this this data. And it's super scary. I mean, phones are constantly listening to you. I mean, this stuff was stuff that people called a conspiracy theory for years and years and years, like this idea that your phone's listening to you, this idea that you and I can have a discussion about something. Then I'm like, what, let me look that up. And I put in the first letter and it's already suggesting something I've never looked up. A lot of times people kind of just poo-pooed that. They thought oh, it's just coincidental, or whatnot. But I had Thomas Drake on the show a couple years ago, and the NSA used to be called no such agency because nobody knew that they existed and whatnot. And obviously, after Edward Snowden, it became public that a lot of the stuff that other people were accusing the government of doing, of spying on everybody illegally and all this, it wasn't just a paranoia that was in the alternative media. It actually was happening. And the scary part is that, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is it seems like for example, I think, how old are you, Zach, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm almost 40.
You're almost 40. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to be 35. So we're close in age. So I feel like we had the benefit of kind of living through the analog world and then seeing the transition to the digital world. So we kind of we kind of got to be spectators a little bit, and we know that certain things that are becoming acceptable to the younger crowds shouldn't be acceptable. I always make the example of if somebody went in your mailbox and open your mail, made a photocopy of it, put it back in your mailbox, and you never knew, would you be okay with that? You'd be like, absolutely not. But why, when big tech is doing that with all your personal information, why is that acceptable? And then the scary part is the young people who never had privacy don't know they lost it, and that becomes the norm to them. So every generation that comes about, it's like whatever world they grow up in, that becomes their norm, and they just accept it. So it takes people like you and I who are kind of seeing the transition happen and seeing that we're giving up too many of our freedoms and all this stuff that, to get outraged, to let people know, like, no, this isn't acceptable. This isn't okay. And when you see, like, I've heard you talk about this on different interviews, and everybody, I mean, I don't care where you stand, everybody should be upset that people like Alex Jones and now London Real, Brian Rose with the David Icke interview, just completely suppressed. I mean, it's like, no, this stuff, we're deciding what truth is. We're deciding what perspective you can see and what you can hear, and nobody else can, and we're deciding what truth is, and everything else is going to be suppressed. Instead of saying, you know what, we believe these are ridiculous perspectives and opinions, but as long as they're not causing violence or they're not telling people to be violent, then you have the right to hear it. And regardless, if I want to watch a 2-hour documentary that Alex Jones did, or if I want to watch a 2-hour documentary about flat Earth or whatever it may be, like, I should have the right to watch that and entertain it. And if I find it ridiculous by the end of it, then that's fine. I should have that right. But for a group of people to decide that they know what the truth is, or they know what perspective we should see, or we should be reading, which articles we should reading, and that's it, then that's really dangerous.
Yeah, I agree, and it's a double-edged sword, because the thing is that they are, I mean, like, big tech is taking your data, and their data collection apparatus. You could almost call it surveillance capitalism. You're taking your data and then they're selling it to, like, different intelligence agencies around the world, including, like, China. And so it's this Trojan horse when we use these phones and we use their browsers and we use their computers. They're surveilling us. And is it a good thing for China to know the location of, every Android user on the planet? I'm going to say no. And the telecom companies shouldn't be selling that information. And there should be, some sort of internet bill of rights that says that you have the freedom to not be tracked. And, but on the other hand, I also know that the amount of data that's being generated by computer systems, sensors and what have you, is growing at an exponential rate. And so I, as someone that's, gone public with this disclosure, I realized that privacy is kind of a losing game. I can create a bot and have it tweet out, like, my location, for example. And I can create a really cheap camera that connects Bluetooth wirelessly to a computer system, and then, uploads pictures of the street. And the thing is that, well, am I not going to be allowed to share that data because it could have faces on it? And, personally, I realize that I'm not going to be able to lock down all of my systems that I use myself. I know that no matter what, the elite, the oligarchs are going to be able to, if they want to, break in and spy on what I'm doing. And so if we I personally believe that if we look at this situation and say, how do we regain our freedom? I think that that's going to be a losing battle. I think that we can stop, maybe wholesale real-time collection of our data being sent to, China. That could work, but I don't think that, all the information about what's happening, all the photos that are going to be automatically generated about the cities and our streets and all that, I don't think that that's going to be able to be stopped. In fact, I think it's a good thing. And the reason that I think that it can be a good thing is, if everyone's going to be under the watchful eye, then I'm going to make that also apply to the oligarchs. And that's really dangerous to the ruling class, right? Because if we lose our freedom, then who says that they can't lose their freedom? And if you actually look at like what's happening with Jeffrey Epstein and, Anthony Weiner and the files that made into the hands of the NYC, basically, for those of your audience that don't know what the backstory is, Anthony Weiner copied, apparently, allegedly, Hillary Clinton's blackmail file that was on his wife's computer, Huma Abedin, who was the chief executive staff member, I think, of Clinton. And so apparently she had a blackmail file. Anthony Weiner copied it. And then when the NYC busted him for soliciting sex from a 14-year-old, they used a warrant to search his computer and found Clinton's blackmail file, right? That's very powerful because now we're using that, weaponizing it to take down the deep state. Like, I believe that Anthony Weiner's laptop was like the key sort of evidence that allowed the Jeffrey Epstein raid that happened. I believe it was February 2017. There was like a huge raid on his island, and around 32 children were rescued, and like 8 people were arrested. The media labeled them as human traffickers. And I believe at this point that military intelligence now has Jeffrey Epstein's decades-long blackmail, right? And And now what we see with this current storm is, I don't know if you follow QAnon, but QAnon keeps on saying that they have it all. The military intelligence has all of the blackmail. And so what it appears is that not only did the private citizen lose privacy, but also the elites lost privacy. And it turns out that is giving fuel to the fire for the current revolution, because it turns out that, the book Economic Hitman, How to Subvert a Nation, that wasn't just applying to these banana republics. It was also applying to the United States. We also, in this country, had a blackmail operation that was being used in order to get all of these politicians like dirt on them so that they could, get rid of them if they ever turned on the central banking cult. And so what we have to realize is that, yes, we're going to lose our freedom, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, if you look at it like what happens in war, if the opposing side gets guns and you've got swords, it's not time to ban guns, it's time to also get guns yourself. And the same way that, we're losing privacy, that doesn't necessarily mean that, that the solution is to regain our privacy. The solution may be to get rid of the privacy also for the elites. And then maybe if that happens, then all of a sudden we're going to find out that we get our privacy back. Just saying.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, and I think it's an important way of looking at it. I mean, I think people like WikiLeaks and the Anonymous group were kind of pioneers in kind of doing a similar thing of saying that they're going to use technology as a weapon and kind of use it against the elite. The Weiner story, I mean, what's crazy, I don't know if you're familiar with the New York police who saw the laptop and said, do you hear stories of there's some reports, I forget who wrote the article, about police officers crying because they were so traumatized by what was on that laptop. A lot of people think it was child porn or who knows, maybe worse, if there is a such thing. And you don't hear about that. You don't hear about that. That what was on the laptop kind of just like disappeared. And you hear about like New York cops committing suicide. Some of them are claimed to be people who saw the laptop. And yeah, these stories get crazy. And I get it. For some people, ignorance is bliss, instead of going down some of these dark rabbit holes. But not too long ago, I mean, just a few years ago, I had Nick Bryan on my show, who wrote the Franklin Scandal book. I had Matthew Valenti, who was a part of the Open Secret documentary. And when you're doing these podcasts about these really dark topics, they're hard to do, but I know how important they were to kind of have these discussions, to let people know, like, this stuff really happened. So when people are accused of this stuff, take it seriously. Don't poo-poo it. Don't pretend it's too crazy to be real. And then when the Epstein thing happened, and it got, a lot of us in the alternative media have been talking about Epstein for years, but when it finally became public and so much of the information became public, and even the most skeptical people are like, okay, there's something more to this story. You would think that a lot of people would it would change their outlook on the world. They would look at that story and be like, you know what? If that's possible, if somebody with that many resources, who was into eugenics, was into all type of weird science stuff, that he was connected to the elite in science, in politics, in huge multi-international corporations. If this guy who has been accused of pedophilia, human trafficking, all this stuff, if this guy can be linked to all these people, and if that can be true, then what the hell can't be true? And you would think that'd be that, for that moment in your life, for lack of a better term, you become woke, right? And it changes your perspective. But now you see this coronavirus thing, and you're seeing people kind of falling for the same tricks again in regards to the media is lying to you, information's being suppressed. I've been doing tons of podcasts on the current events and what's going on right now, and constantly sharing articles. And people are sending me screenshots of articles that I'm sharing, saying that they're clicking on it and they're getting these pop-ups saying that it's been fact-checked by a third party, and it's a conspiracy theory article or something like along those lines. People who are streaming live on YouTube are getting kicked off if they're talking about 5G or coronavirus or COVID-19. And I mean, I don't know if there's a link between 5G and coronavirus. I mean, I don't think there is, but people should still have the right to talk about it. And when you see stuff like, I brought up London Real briefly. I don't know if you're familiar with that story with David Icke, but they're live streaming. It was one of the most watched live streams ever in the history of YouTube, and all these people are watching it. And even in the beginning of that interview, Brian Rose, the host, tells David Icke, his guest, like, hey, I might not agree with everything you say, but I'll defend your right to say it. And he said this before he even knew he was going to have issues with freedom of speech. And next thing you know, he gets pulled and never had a strike, never had any issues. And all this stuff really does, in my opinion, in many cases, it ends up making people more intrigued with what they have to say. And it makes them also think that, hey, if you're like the 5G thing, everything I've seen, I'm like, I don't really see there's a link there. There's nothing that really persuades me that much. But and then when I'm seeing stuff being just suppressed and people getting in trouble for even discussing it, it pushes me in the direction of like, well, maybe there's something there that I haven't, that I'm not aware of. Maybe it is more serious. Maybe there is some research that needs to be done in regards to, to 5G. So these type of things really ends up becoming counterproductive. But the fact that people, I share stuff on all my social media accounts all the time, just articles I find, and a lot of the stuff is like from somewhat mainstream websites and mainstream publications, and even that stuff's being flagged now. Where just like, if there's anything that goes against the grain, then Absolutely not. You can't share this. You can't, you're seeing with vaccines. I've had Del Bigtree on the show. He had I think he had a contract with Amazon Prime where it was going to be on Amazon Prime forever. And his documentary Vaxxed about the CDC whistleblower gets pulled. I've had other filmmakers who's had the same issue. I think the Brzezinski movie with who does the alternative cancer treatment, his movie I think has been pulled everywhere. I had these filmmakers who did a documentary called The Big Secret. I think it's called The Big Secret, and that they got pulled, and it was another kind of a documentary that went through the history of medicine and all that stuff. And it wasn't. I mean, it's not stuff that seems that controversial because it's like. It's not like, oh, people are reptilians and UFOs and all. I mean, I almost feel like they wouldn't suppress that stuff, and they're suppressing this stuff because it's closer to the truth.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's no one takes the Joker seriously until they tape his mouth shut, and this is what we're seeing now. And by the way, 5G. I was skeptical until Ken Wheeler, who is a very popular person that talks about physics and metaphysics, and he wrote a book on magnetism, and he follows Tesla, and he's read all of Tesla's work, and he basically bases all of his physics on what Tesla was saying, the way physics works, which is not the standard model, by the way, he explained the dangers of 5G. And he said the danger about 5G, which is different than other waves, is that it happens to dump all of its energy into your body when it passes through it. So like other things like light just sort of like bounce off and they don't really penetrate that deep. But 5G will dump all of its energy. Like let's say it's pointed at your head. All the energy is going to be dumped in your brain. And the problem is that your neurons can act like antennae to certain frequencies that they're resonant to, and 5G kind of hits a sweet spot there. And so there was a project called Project Bizarro, which was a research effort to figure out how to stimulate people with 5G. The 5G band, which I think is around like 10 to 80 gigahertz. And they found that they could make people orgasm. They could make people, get sort of like schizophrenic like attributes for a while. They could make them laugh, and they could, incapacitate them with these waves, and also make them sad, right? So they found all these different sort of ways that they could modulate people's mood and behavior with this with these radio waves. And it's not only radio waves, they can also do it with ultrasonic. And so like in the news you may hear like, oh, there was like an ultrasonic attack that happened like in Cuba and people got like really messed up from it. And it turns out that, and this is also in fact used in civilian cases for certain alarm systems, where if you try to break into like a high value vault, then a ultrasonic pulse that you can't hear will get emitted, and it will make you immediately incapacitated. That means like on the floor, vomiting, and they can do this with like ultrasonic. And so the fact that they're trying to rush in this high intensity 5G system that has these characteristics is, it causes alarm. We should pause. We should be like, well, let's see what the safety features of this are, because there's energy, like light energy has more, energy per quanta, I guess, for lack of a better term, because it's got a much higher frequency. Then I think it's like in the trillion hertz, the terahertz, rather than the billion gigahertz that the 5G's in. But light's everywhere, and our bodies are designed for it. Because if they weren't, then we would have died out long ago. 5G isn't something that's natural, and as a result, animals and people haven't had an evolutionary history with it where we can select the traits that are good, that aren't susceptible to 5G radiation. And so as a result, the effects of 5G are also unknown. And the thing is that there is a statistical higher probability that you'll get cancer if you live next to just a 5G radio station than not. And so, the question is that like, well, why haven't we studied that? And, this much higher energy 5G, why haven't we studied that? Like, let's get a safety study and prove that this thing is safe, or, figure out what's wrong with it and figure out, maybe there's something better we can use. I still don't understand why we're not using lasers to communicate, digitally, because they've got like 1,000 times more bandwidth, for infrared over 5G. And it makes zero sense to me why we would be using 80 gigahertz when we can use like 4 terahertz. And so I just want to put that out there, that infrared works great. We should be using that, but we don't. And I don't know why. And so, 5G, not good. Not good. We need to study it at least.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with a lot of new stuff, is that it's almost like we're the guinea pigs. It's like, hey, how about we put it out in the open, and then we see if anybody gets harmed from it, or if there's any long-term effects after people have long-term effects. It's I just had the attorney from I don't know if you've watched the movie Dark Waters, starring Mark Ruffalo. Who Mark plays is this attorney who found out that DuPont was suppressing all this information that they're putting these toxic chemicals, they call them forever chemicals, into the water and whatnot. And what this attorney found out was that these chemicals, like there's more chemicals, and they're constantly changing them, and they're unregulated because they're new and they don't know much about it, and you really don't have to prove them to be safe. It's more about like when somebody gets hurt, then you can sue them and force them to have to prove that they're safe afterwards. And which is ridiculous. And the 5G things kind of seems the same, like the same type of scenario, where it's like, we don't know if it's safe, we don't know if it's unsafe, but let's just go with it and then wait and see. And I think that's a dangerous way of doing things. I mean, one thing we know for sure is the fact that people who have turn off all their Wi-Fi, turn off everything at home, like they sleep better, they feel better. People who don't live next to power lines. Obviously, there's a lot of other things, other factors that are affecting our mental health, our physical health, the way we sleep, the way we feel, our moods, that we might not be aware of. And I know Ben Greenfield, he's talked about, he's a health and fitness guy, and he's talked about how he literally has like everything turned off at night and no Wi-Fi, no nothing going through the house, and like the huge difference it's made in his life and his quality of sleep and whatnot. So it's there's something there, and I definitely think that it's something that should be researched. And I'm with you. Why aren't we looking at other things like using lasers or whatnot? I mean, I don't know why this 5G thing is being pushed so much. I don't know if there's some corporation or some people who have incentive in pushing this. I'm sure there is if I did enough research. I know you brought up Ken Wheeler. He studied Tesla. A lot of his work, and I'm a huge fan of Tesla because obviously he was motivated by trying to improve humanity, and he didn't have the profit motive like a lot of people do, and that's why him and others butt heads. But a lot of his studies or his research after he passed away in New York, like the FBI took it, right?
Dude, it wasn't just the FBI. The person that was the conservator of Nikola Tesla's work was Donald Trump's grandfather.
That's right. I knew there's a link there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a link. And so after he got to take the technology, but he had to inventory it within 6 months. And so he wrote to the government that he had like 70, and don't quote me on this, but like 70 like chests of Tesla's inventions, and then wrote that none of it was of any consequential value.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, he definitely was a I mean, every person. I think every great mind is a little weird. You know, I know Tesla. People talk about how socially awkward he was, or how he was a little weird. He had like, you know, he where was he? He went somewhere. Was it in Colorado where he was sending signals to what he thought was extra or UFOs or some type of alien somewhere, ET somewhere, and so I mean, but all this stuff seems crazy if you're not researching it and you're not. I mean, I think a lot of stuff seems unbelievable until it becomes reality. I mean, if we went back 100 years and try to explain people what the internet is, or you know what a cell phone is and what it's capable of today, I mean, it would seem like science fiction to those people too. So I definitely try to keep open mind with everything, and understand that a lot of things seem too hard to, or too crazy to believe until eventually you're like, oh shit, there is some truth to that. So yeah, I mean, Tesla, Elon Musk, it's funny because he used Tesla for the name of his car company, and in a way initially I'm like, oh yeah, he's kind of doing the same thing. He's not really motivated by money. He's pushing this you know, the electric cars, and he understands that electric cars and other technologies like ethanol and stuff has been suppressed, and he kind of seems like a Tesla type person, but he talks a lot about the dangers of AI, but yet his car and a lot of the technologies that he's pushing and developing is I think going to cause is some of the problem, right? I mean, when with self-driving cars and all the technology that's going in the cars and the tracking stuff, I mean, he's kind of helping push the same things that he seems to be worried about.
Yeah, he's right there. And, you know, I have a lot of admiration for him, but at the same time, in this sort of journey of figuring out that the oligarchs run the planet and seeing how all these bad people seem to be praised by the media, and seeing the degree that Elon Musk has been praised by the media makes me think that he's part of their cult, for lack of a better term. And I don't, and I've got a lot of suspicion with Elon Musk. I definitely follow him and see his stuff, and sometimes I'll retweet him, but, you know, they were calling him the next Einstein. And the only reason the media would, you know, conclusively say that as a consensus is because he was doing something that enriched the powers that be. And so, you know, I'm a little skeptical, but I do appreciate what he did with the Tesla car. You know, it makes me hope that what he was alluding to was a future where, you know, some sort of Tesla free energy machine could be unleashed on the world, and then you wouldn't even have to refuel your car. How cool would that be?
Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, it is. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I kind of have this like love-hate relationship with Elon Musk. Like, in a way, I feel like he's doing some things to improve humanity. Like I said, when you look at just the history of how we got addicted to oil and all that stuff. I mean, people like James Corbett, who did How Big Oil Conquered the World, that tells a story. You look at documentaries like Pump and Gas Hole and all these great documentaries that show you all these alternative technologies that have been suppressed and why they've been suppressed. I think it's great because you look how popular electric cars are today, and it's definitely, I mean, Tesla, the car company, definitely gets a lot of the credit for it because they once he created that market and showed that there was a market for it and it was possible. Everybody else kind of had to follow him, and they couldn't ignore the fact that people wanted electric cars. I mean, I know there's still the argument of, well, how great are electric cars for the environment compared to a petroleum car because of the fact that the blood minerals and stuff that are used for the batteries, and how do you dispose of the batteries and all that stuff. But so I know there's that debate too. But I'm with you. I definitely have this like love-hate relationship with them. And
no, I see. So the thing is that all of the garbage problems can be solved. The problem is that they don't have enough energy, right? Like, essentially what you could do is you could create a giant incinerator and then take whatever garbage that you wanted and throw it in the incinerator, and it would get it hot enough so that anything that was thrown in there would melt, essentially. And then once it melts, you turn it into an ash, and then you take the ash and then you chemically separate it into its component parts, and then, sell them as raw inputs for, the economy again. And, all of that stuff, if you look at like, well, what's killing the planet? Well, it's, agriculture. Well, why is agriculture destroying the planet? Well, we plant all these crops. Well, why do we plant the crops outside? Why don't we have them in a hydroponic? Well, we have to plant them outside because we need all that free energy from the sun in order to grow it. And like, well, what if energy is free? Well, then you don't need to have them in a field. You could grow crops in a hydroponic, multi-layered, facility. And with free energy, you pretty much is like the unlocking mechanism that allows you to have a completely different type of economy that we've never seen before. We go from a type 0 civilization, to a type 1, where we generate more power on the planet than falls from the sun onto the planet. And, what kind of planet would that look like? Well, we're not going to get there by burning carbon, and we're not going to get there by burning uranium-235. It's just too toxic. We're going to get there by, cold fusion, which is a real energy source that's been proven internationally. We're going to get there by hot fusion and maybe some other exotic energy forces like zero-point energy. And, if we have that, then, we have a new type of society where every nation's independent on itself and doesn't rely on, globalist fuckery. And if you realize that, well, if no one needs the central bank, if they can produce all the things that they need domestically, then you start to realize why Tesla was such a threat to the establishment. Because even though that new type of civilization would generate a whole bunch of abundant wealth that is unimaginable today, the thing is that the people that would be running it may not be the people that were running it. And the people that were running it want to keep on running it. And so they killed the whole project, in my opinion, because they were worried that it would break their oil monopolies. And you can't really blackmail a nation if they have everything that they need anyways. They just give you the finger and say, we'll do whatever we want. Thank you very much. We don't need your oil when we've got these free energy machines. And so, the barrier between, what our old civilization was and where it's going is the energy question. And with sort of like the fall of the cabal that is going on now, what we're seeing is we see this opportunity where we can create a whole bunch of new technologies. We can release the cures and we can release the free energy. And once we have that, then a new type of digital renaissance is going to happen where, like the old Renaissance, which saw like all the technologies released, with the invention of the printing press, with a flood of new ideas, we're going to see a flood of new ideas happening in the next decade and probably, sustain itself for half a century. And that's like really exciting because it's like watching the birth of a new civilization. It's that level of scale of change we're going to see in our lifetimes.
Yeah, the thing with Tesla is you hear those stories about him trying to get the energy from the sky, from these towers, use the ground as a conductor and give everybody free electricity, things like that. And he really did seem like he was motivated by trying to leave the world better than he received it, and trying to make a real change in the world. And that's why him and Edison butt heads, because he cared more about a profit than anything else. So yeah, I mean, it is interesting. And you hear these stories about inventors throughout history that came out with a way of doing like zero energy, creating, what are they called, like 0-point energy, like you referred to, which is basically like a machine or some type of mechanical thing that can create energy without needing energy, right? Am I describing it correctly?
Yeah, it borrows it from the ether and puts it into radiant energy.
Yeah. Do you think that somebody has done that before? Do you think that is it possible?
Yeah, I think that that's what's powering sort of the UFOs that people are seeing. Um, and either that or some sort of new hot fusion. There's definitely a lot of weird stuff that is on the esoteric fringe, but also right in the open. Um, I'll give you an example, and this is actually an open secret, and you can see research papers on this. But if you take an electron and you start oscillating it in an electrical field at the terahertz frequency, then what happens is that the mass of the electron flips to negative. You have a negative mass electron. And, what explains that phenomenon? We have no idea. Like a standard model doesn't explain any of that. And so there's so much that we don't know. And the things that the physicists are saying, which is that there is a lot of energy in the vacuum of space. It's unimaginable. And so if we can just pull a little bit of that energy out of the ether and bring it into, a voltage potential, then you're essentially going to have, devices that never need to be charged. They'll just pull energy out of the air. And then, people won't understand the concept of something dying because its batteries ran out. They're like, what's a battery? For them, it'll be an electrical generator that just is ever present, that just generates energy out of the air and just, puts it to the device's use. And that's what I believe exists. How that gets rolled out in what time frame, I have no idea.
Yeah, I definitely think that without a doubt there's without a doubt there could be somebody who's already figured out a way of doing certain things. You hear stories of inventors who came out with zero point energy stuff, and it does seem fascinating. You hear stories about, like, I don't know if you recall that story of the water powered car that the guy was on. Like, you can still see videos of him. He had this doom buggy looking thing, and he's like, you can put tap water in it, you can put bottled water, rainwater, and this thing runs. And nobody wanted to invest in it, and he couldn't get anybody to really invest in this expanding this technology. And the next thing you know, you find him dead. And the only I think there's a small snippet of a video when he was on his local news, and they were doing a little interview with this just local inventor or whatnot. But so, and then in Gas Hole, it's a documentary about, they showed a couple of guys mechanics who figured out a way of getting 100 miles per gallon in an old Buick or something like that. So it's a lot of things that seem impossible, you come to find out, it is possible. And in some cases, some people have already figured it out. And, but this stuff has been suppressed. I mean, that's the problem with kind of the world we live in. They have incentive to kind of push planned obsolescence, to have things not last long, and to have some old technology be the one that they can kind of milk the shit out of until finally, they're forced to move on to the next thing. And that's kind of been what happened with cars. It's just they milked the shit out of petroleum cars until Elon Musk finally forced them to kind of move on to the next technology. So it is interesting. All this stuff is super interesting. Now, in regards to what's going on, well, actually, another question I wanted to ask earlier in the conversation was, before you got into or you got exposed to all this stuff and you started noticing kind of the fuckery that was going on at Google, did you have any political views? Were you into any conspiracies or history or anything that kind of sparked your interest, or were you kind of just a gamer? You're into creating software programming, maybe that type of stuff, and then now, because now you're very.
I was anti-conspiracy theorist.
You were.
I was against it. I was like, no way, because you couldn't hide the truth, and all these things that had been programmed. I just couldn't believe that the elites would be controlled as puppets, and that But at some point, things just sort of got off the rail, and I was like, is this real life or is this an act of theater? And I looked back, and it's I was there at Obama's inauguration in Washington, D.C., Like, I really thought that it was change that we can believe in. And it turns out that he's just part of the cult. And he's like, his parents were like part of the CIA. And then, like, you know, his name isn't even real. And that, you know, that became sort of like the badness of his presidency became obvious when he won the Peace Prize. And then a month later, we were taking down Libya. You know, and it was just like, and I saw these countries just get toppled in the Arab Spring, you know, quote unquote, you know, and then it turns out that we created ISIS, and, you know, it's just like, I was like, okay, well, something really, really bad is going on. And then it was my friend, he was a musician, and he had a following, and would always post on Facebook, and he started posting. Like, he turned pro-Trump more than anybody else we'd ever seen. And we couldn't understand why he thought that Trump was going to win everything and restore the American Republic. And I was like, so I talked to him, I was like, hey, why do you think, you know, why are you so hardcore about Trump? And this was like back during 2016, like before, you know, during the election. And he basically said that the entire media was shilling out for Hillary Clinton. It was all under control of a cabal. I went, no way. But it stuck with me. And as I started to see the media play out its theater, I went, wow, this theory that the whole media is controlled really explains the current behavior that I'm seeing from this complex system. And the more that I started thinking about the whole thing about how the whole system could be controlled, the more I was like, oh yeah, that's actually what's going on. But it took a couple of years for me to understand the complete domination by this hidden cult, and how thoroughly they had rewritten history. And that's the thing that's going to make people really like you know, sort of break from reality, is how our history's been rewritten by Hollywood. You know, like I don't know if you've been down this rabbit hole, but the Titanic, when it sank, it wasn't just like a random accident. It had like the three people that were standing opposed to the creation of the Federal Reserve. And after they died, the Federal Reserve didn't have the opposition, and so it was able to be created.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard how it was actually another boat that was too. They had one boat that was too expensive to repair or whatnot, so they changed the names and then, you know, create this accident for the purpose of getting insurance money or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, and then you look at the Creatures of Jekyll Island, that book. You look at, you know, you brought up John Perkins, the book, The Hitman, Economic Hitman. Mm-hmm. I mean, history is full of conspiracies. You look at all the coups from the early 50s in Iran and the Guatemala with the United Fruit Company, you know, Alan Dulles, his hand in that, you know, the head of CIA, they took down Iranian government because they want to nationalize the oil fields, you know. So you look at like history. I mean, if you learn history, it's hard not to run into conspiracies over and over again. World War I, I mean, it got the assassination was by the Black Hand, which was like this kind of secret society group or whatnot, and all the secretive stuff that happened with, you know, the Sykes-Picot Agreement with carving up the Middle East, and so England and France going to have influence over it, and so it's full of conspiracies. When people dismissed something, you know, as a conspiracy theory, it drives me nuts, because it's like, you just obviously haven't learned history. I mean, you look at, you know, like I talked about Thomas Drake. I mean, what he uncovered seems like conspiracy theory until he uncovered it. Edward Snowden, you know, I had the whistleblower. He was the UN whistleblower from the great film called Backstabbing for Beginners, where he exposed UN corruption. And so it's undoubtable. If you learn history, it's undoubtable. But your point about how you can rewrite history, I remember I had Gerard Williams on years ago. He was the guy who wrote the book Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler. He was a mainstream journalist and writer and happened to be in Argentina to look. I think he was doing research on some other story and ended up finding a bunch of people who were talking about Nazi Germans escaping and making their way to Argentina. And little by little, he was uncovering the fact that, holy shit, there's some truth to this. And when I had him on years ago, I remember talking to a couple World War II buffs and friends of mine that are really into history, and they dismissed it like crazy. And then a couple years later, when Hunting Hitler was on TV, they're like, hey, have you heard about Hunting Hitler? I'm like, yeah, fuckface. Like, that guy Gerard Williams, who's in that show, was the guy who was on my show a couple years ago. I'm like, it doesn't seem that far-fetched now, does it? So it's like, when you put it on mainstream media, when you put it on mainstream TV, I should say, then all of a sudden you can digest it and it seems believable. But when somebody's saying it at first, people dismiss it if they don't have the support of the. It's like it has to be accepted by mainstream media. Same thing with the Epstein story. The Epstein story, when people in the alternative media world were talking about it, it was dismissed. It seemed like it was fabricated. It was too far-fetched. It was too unbelievable. But then once CNN, MSNBC, mainstream media is talking about it, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now it's believable. It's like, what the fuck? Like, people have been talking about this. You're right. I mean, it is a little frustrating when you see how people dismiss things, and when you look at history, it's full of conspiracies. It's full of things that seem too crazy to be true until eventually it's proven to be true. So it's I mean, and you can rewrite history. You look at things like the escape of Adolf Hitler. History books and everybody, all the historians will just tell you, yeah, he died, he killed himself, whatever, this and that. And it's like, when Gerard Williams looked into this and he's like, holy shit, I'm researching this and finding out that we've just been telling the same story over and over again, and there's zero evidence that he died there. Without a doubt, there's no evidence. And then when they did DNA tests on the bones, come to find out that it wasn't even a male, and it was a female, and it wasn't even the age of his wife, so it couldn't have been Eva. So it's like, what evidence is this story that we keep telling based on? And then he finds out that the FBI and Hoover and also the Soviets also had hunches that he escaped and he was somewhere else, and actually had operations looking for him. So it's like they didn't even believe what they were telling the public. But it's like, if you can repeat a lie over and over again, it becomes true. People just don't question it. So I had a historian, Manuel Rosa, who also wrote 6 books on the true identity and history of Christopher Columbus. And I found myself to be in a very similar situation when I was hearing him describe his research. I'm like, a lot of it's just people just haven't looked into it. People just are just taking everything from face value and just saying, like, okay, if this is what I've been told, then this must be real and true. And then when you get somebody who really dives deep into it, you realize, like, holy shit, this is backed by really poor research or no research at all. So it's questioning things is so important. That's why it's so frustrating when you see the suppression of information. Like I said, I mean, you see the vaccine thing is huge now, and people, I mean, the Bill Gates thing, I love the fact that people are so I think it's like there's a petition where people are signing up to, about not taking Bill Gates' vaccine, which is hilarious. Just as a side note, it's hilarious that a guy who is connected to Microsoft, who has nothing to do with science or medicine or health, all of a sudden he's like our leading expert for vaccines. Like, why are people just accepting that? I've gotten in arguments with people about the safety of vaccines, and people are like, well, you're not a doctor. Well, what the fuck? Like, so is Bill Gates, and why does everybody seem to be okay with taking his word for it?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that, like, they're saying that, like, oh, you're not a doctor. You're not, like, Trump isn't a doctor. He can't talk about hydroxychloroquine. He's not a doctor. But hey, neither is Bill Gates. But he's accepted. He gets to go through the gates. Like, why does Bill Gates get to go through the gates and not President Trump, right? Or how come when someone says, oh, like, it's like the founder of the Weather Channel came out and said that global warming was pseudoscience. And the response is like, well, he's not a climate scientist. We need to listen to climate scientists. Except when it comes to Greta Thunberg, then all of a sudden a 16-year-old know-nothing kid can sit there and get widely popular and be a credible source on this whole global warming thing. Like, she knows literally nothing. And it's amazing to me that these people can do this cognitive dissonance, or they switch from one to the other and not realize that it's all theater, and not wake up and go, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? Like, that's the way that it should be, but it's not. And I'm hoping that, as this great awakening unfolds, that there's going to be some threshold that people wake up and go, hey, this is all, fake, phony, and false.
Yeah, remember the Vegas shooting? It was the same thing. Like, anybody who's questioning it was considered a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, there's so many unanswered questions. Like, who was this guy? Like, all of a sudden his brother gets caught with child porn. They lock him up, coincidentally, which you never heard about again. All this weird stuff was happening. All these weird, just unanswered questions. And yet, people who question these things are considered conspiracy theorists. I mean, Robert Kennedy Jr., who has become kind of the face of, the vaccine safety, he forever was considered a respectful environmentalist. He's done tons of great things for getting chemicals out of our products and whatnot. And eventually he ends up getting into this vaccine debate, and all of a sudden he's not credible. It's like, wait, this guy was a respected environmentalist for years, and people loved him, and now all of a sudden people are turning on him. I mean, it is wild. I mean, it's wild how certain topics just people have been so brainwashed. It's like that quote, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And that's kind of what happened. It's like telling them, and I've said this over and over again on the show. You look at pharmaceutical companies, you look at chemical companies, you look at these big industries, there's example after example of them doing things that are corrupt, them doing things for a profit motive that end up harming people. I mean, you look at all the drugs that end up being FDA approved, and the next thing you know, they're harming people, and they end up having to be taken off the market or whatnot. I mean, this happens over and over again. The fact that they hide research of stuff that that they're promoting that they know can do harm, because there's no law having to force them to show any research that shows that their product's unsafe. They only have to show research that their product is safe. So, and the revolving door with the FDA, the EPA, all these government departments with chemical companies and big corporations and big pharma. I mean, it's, and then all of a sudden you talk about vaccines, and it's like, no, that's the one topic that people are like, no. That company's moral. They have a moral department in their company, and that's the vaccine department. It's like, it's so silly. It's like it's the same things that would motivate them to put out a product that harms people, in regards to a prescription drug. I mean, it would be the same thing with vaccines. To me, it's when you've been lied to as many times as you have, then you have to say that they're guilty until proven innocent, not innocent until proven guilty. To me, you prove that you're not harming people. Show me the research. And really, like I said in the beginning of this conversation, the more they hide stuff, the more they, when Del Bigtree's documentary about CDC whistleblower William Thompson gets pulled, when it was really not an anti-vax documentary. It was only a documentary about this one specific story of the CDC whistleblower who's a author of a study that showed a link between autistic symptoms and specific vaccines. Like, the fact that gets pulled, what does that tell you? What does that, what does that tell you? It's just, it's mind-boggling when you see all these alternative perspectives and stuff just not even being, you can't even get the other side of the story. I always say, I'm not anti-vaccines. I'm for people having the right to decide and getting all sides of the story so they can decide for themselves. If the internet was if you could just research any topic, like, I feel like you used to be able to do this, because before I started this podcast, long before I started this podcast, when I used to do just my own personal research, I used to be able to go online, Google something, and find interesting perspectives. And yeah, some stuff was fringe, some stuff was completely over the top, But I got to entertain them, and I got to see different perspectives, different opinions, different websites, different researchers, and kind of come up with my own conclusion. Today, you go online, it's like they force feed you mainstream narrative. They force feed you CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, CBS, even though CBS, who just got caught using Sky News Italian hospital footage for the reporting on a New York hospitals, and yet where the fuck is Google? Where the fuck is YouTube to say, hey, you know what? You're showing deceiving stuff, so we're going to consider you fake news, and we're not gonna promote your stuff. When people Google a topic, we're not going to have CBS News pop up anymore. It's like, and then I talk to people like Russ Baker from whowhatwhy.org. He's talked to me about his traffic being completely suppressed. He's getting less traffic on his website throughout the years. People like James Corbett, same thing. He talks about how his documentaries are harder to find. You could put the exact same title or the exact title for his documentaries or certain videos, and it'll be hard to find. It's hard to find. So this idea of that, like, oh, well, we have these algorithms that only give you what you're looking for. We're here to help you find, give you suggestions to help you find what you're looking for, is just complete bullshit. I mean, isn't what's her name, who just ran for president, the female who's suing Google? I'm having a brain fart right now. Tulsi.
Laura Loomer.
No, Tulsi.
And Tulsi, too.
Yeah. Oh, they're both suing Google?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're suing Google for...
Tulsi lost, though.
She did, okay. Do you know any of the specifics on what she was suing them for?
Yeah, after the debates, Google canceled her or suspended her ad account, which meant that she wasn't able to access paid advertising for 6 hours while, during the surge.
Yeah, which was bullshit, because everybody knows during the debate, it's a great time to learn about certain people and then Google who they are or find stuff on them or whatnot, and people are online. Yeah, I mean, it is scary, I mean, what's your opinion on possibly using alternatives like BitChute and other websites? I mean, I use DuckDuckGo now way more often, because it's obvious that when I use Google and I use DuckDuckGo, Google force feeds me the mainstream websites and articles or whatnot. I mean, do you think that eventually people are going to be so fed up that they're going to use these alternatives, or it's one of those things where, like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, it's become such a monopoly that you're never really going to stop them?
No, I think that the whole thing is ripe for disruption. People want to find information, and the user experience on Google is getting worse, and YouTube as well. And the thing is that they won't show you notifications, and they won't rank the videos that you want to see and that you see all the time very highly. And all it takes is somebody to go through and create an alternative service that just finds the information that people want to see and then aggregates it together. I was just looking at this the other day because I'm doing web dev right now, and I'm just wow, I can just scrape all this information that exists on all these public websites and then create a news feed automatically, right? I could even create a channel that just takes 20 of the top people that I want to listen to, and then scrapes it and just stitches it all together in a video stream and then streams it out. And then you could just tune in like a television channel, and I realized, I was well, just no one's doing it. That's the thing right now. No one's just for whatever reason. I mean, I won't say that. There are some people that do that, and those are the news sites that I use all the time. I'll give you an example. We Are the News. And, you take that word, you put a dot between the last two letters, and that site scrapes 8kun, which is where the QAnon drops happen. And I get stuff before anyone else does, because it's constantly monitoring that stuff. And the problem is that I've got to go through 5 different websites to get all the information. If I centralized all that in one thing and then use keywords to trigger which ones go up in ranking, I could have a really kick-ass news feed that wouldn't be like, wouldn't be censorable. And I think that they know this, that as the oligarchs push, the more that they push against, the ability for people to find information, the more that people are just going to say, fuck it, I'm just going to create my own thing. And it's just going to spring up. If Twitter gets, if they kick president off Twitter and Twitter goes to, Gab, then everyone's going to leave Twitter, and then they're going to lose their power control. And so my problem with Gab and BitChute is the services are kind of terrible, and they don't have a UI guy that's sitting there going, well, how do we figure out like what's relevant? And I think it's like related to the autism that seems endemic within the programmer community. They just don't understand human nature, and they don't understand like what a good interface is, and they don't understand like how to calculate relevance to someone for whatever reason. And whenever I visit BitChute, it's like I'm overloaded with things that are like neo-Nazi sort of stuff, and really it should, the system should have an idea of who you are and what you like to watch, and then when you visit the site, it tries to match you up with that the best that it can, and it's not doing that right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is a shame that these platforms are so big and people have gotten so used to them that it's almost like a comfort thing. It's like people who get an iPhone and then they just consistently stay with iPhones because they're easy to use or whatnot. I mean, people don't like change. So when you do create a new website, it has to be user-friendly, because the second it becomes difficult, people are just like, fuck it, I'm going to go back to YouTube, or I'm going to go back to Google or whatever, you're using. But these things aren't going to last forever. I mean, I remember when MySpace was huge, and people listening who are younger than us are probably like, what the fuck's MySpace? So it just, it does, if it eventually, if a alternative comes around and they do it correctly, something that does seem like could never end up, I guess, dying, like Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, it could happen. It absolutely could happen. And I'm sure some genius kid is in some dorm room well, not a dorm room right now because it's everybody's at home in lockdown, but is somewhere messing around with programming and maybe creating the next big social media app or website. So it's it's absolutely possible. So I don't know how long they think they can keep getting away with this, but for the time being, I think because there aren't, like you said, there aren't great alternatives. I think people will keep using them. But once a decent alternative comes around, I think people are going to be so sick of this shit, because regardless where you stand on any of these issues politically, or if you even if you're just somebody who just enjoys to go down conspiracy theory rabbit holes, some really over the top stuff. I mean, you can't go on any of these big platforms without feeling like you're being force fed a narrative. And I think eventually people will get sick of that.
Yeah. And, and people want to find information. And if you get in the way of it, they're just going to look harder. So, it's 2020. It's an exciting year. We're going to have the election. So, I believe that the deep state is going to pull out all of their guns in the next 6 months. So this is going to be a fantastic time to be alive, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
Is this one of their guns, the whole coronavirus hysteria? I mean, that's one theory that I've kind of entertained a little bit, is if the same people can push Russiagate for all these years and spend taxpayers' money and get, mainstream media to talk about it like it's a real thing, if they can do that to try to take down the president if they're not a fan of them, why couldn't they push this narrative? Why couldn't they make this a little bit more serious? You hear stories of Bill Maher talking about how he would take a recession or a depression if it meant, Trump wouldn't be reelected. I mean, obviously that's easy for him to say because he's rich, so it wouldn't affect him. But do you think that is that a possibility, you think?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So do you think, so some people have entertained the idea that it's possible that the same people who kind of pushed the Russiagate narrative to try to take down the president could be doing the same in regards to this coronavirus hysteria, maybe pushing it for the purpose of causing all this, this depression, for the purpose of making it impossible for.
Yeah. I think that, but at the same time, I also realize that they don't have a vaccine yet, and that makes me realize that that there might be something new to the story. Because if I was in their position and I had total control when this virus got released, then I would make sure that I would have a vaccine so that I could vaccinate everyone during the height of the fear. And the fact that they don't have a vaccine yet tells me that, either they don't want the vaccine out because they want everything locked down, or they were caught off guard. And somehow their virus got released before they realized it was going to get released.
Yeah, well, there is a story about the U.S. government giving like $3.7 million in a grant to a Wuhan lab, and there's people who were telling them beforehand that some of the testing they were doing was kind of risky or whatnot. And then you have like the Harvard professor that was linked to the Chinese government that he was arrested. And so there's tons of like just really, really shady stuff going on that makes you wonder like what is this, like, and then there's I forget which lab in the U.S. where they got shut down twice by the CDC late last year or sometime late last year because of contaminant issues, just stuff like that. So there's a lot of just moving parts and different things that really seem interesting. I mean, I definitely think there's way more to the story than we're being told. I mean, the vaccine thing, yeah. I completely agree with you. Like, that's one thing I've thought about too, is like, okay, well, if this was completely predetermined, why don't they have a vaccine ready? But and I guess the other hand, the counter argument is, well, if you release it too quickly, wouldn't they know that, like, hey, you can't, create a vaccine this quickly? But it is weird because they had the Event 201 and other things where it's just like they have been talking about a possible situation like this for a long time. Like, why we seem so unprepared, right? So the whole thing does seem really unusual and weird. It definitely seems like there's more to this story than just a virus that is killing old people and sick people, because, in my personal opinion, I just think that if we're reporting on the flu deaths every single day, the media was telling you one more case of the flu in Montana, one more case of the flu in Vegas, one more death of the flu here, like, it would also eventually scare the shit out of people, and people would feel like, holy crap, this is like a big deal. But I think a lot of times people were just naive to how many people were dying every day. I mean, 20,000 people die of hunger every freaking day, and that doesn't have to be tested for. That doesn't have to be developed, no vaccine for. It literally, you just feed people, and yet we don't come together for that. So to me, it does seem a little interesting that we went to these extremes. And the thing that seems a little scary to me is how quickly people are accepting just giving up all their freedoms, everything they love, their ability to get together with friends, family. People are being hostile at grocery stores if you get too close to them. I mean, all this for a virus that could potentially kill somebody in some cases, but yet those numbers are being inflamed, because you're seeing a lot of stories of people who have the virus but yet aren't dying because of the virus, but yet on their death certificate is saying, coronavirus or COVID-19. So there's a lot of fishy stuff. And then all the tests, I mean, the accuracy of the tests. So like all the data that we used to the graphs, like the Neil Ferguson graph, his prediction of the millions and millions of deaths that were completely, he completely backtracked after, like all this data that we use to justify this complete shutdown, all of it seems flawed, and yet people are completely willing to just give up everything. So I think that is a little scary to me. But I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know it sounds like you're probably making something to eat or doing something in the kitchen, but
yeah, my girlfriend's preparing stuff.
Oh, awesome. Well, I don't want to hold you up to too much longer. I really appreciate your time, Zach. Is there anything that you would like to promote? Any I know that people can follow you on Twitter and
so
your website.
If people are interested to seeing all the leaks, sort of the analysis of what they mean, then what you can do is you can go to my website, which is at zachvorhies.com. You can also search for my name and it will bring you to me. I want to let people know that if they want to join the fight, they can do that by following me on twitter.com/perpetualmaniac, or just search my name, Zach Vorhies. And I'm going up against Google. I'm exposing them for their censorship. And if they want to help me save America, then I recommend that they follow me there and join the fight. So, and together we're going to take back America. So ZachVorhies.com and twitter.com/perpetualmaniac.
Awesome, Zach. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and I really admire you. You everything you do, and you fighting these big, huge companies, and I'm sure there's been some sacrificing and some backlash because of it. But yeah, I mean, we need people who are outspoken, people from the inside who can really explain to people from the outside, like myself, what's really going on and how it's really being done. So stay safe, Zach. I really appreciate it. I'll put links to all your site and your Twitter account, all that stuff in the show description, and I'll send you the links once it's up and live. And hopefully we talk again in the near future.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ricardo.
Hey, thanks, Zach. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Yep.
Take care.
Take care.
Believe in the ripple effect.